get into the Gemara over here. We've got the discussion that we started yesterday, and it has to do with cooked vegetables. The bracha, does cooking make the vegetables lose their bracha from Bari Pri Adama to Shahakal? Does it not make them lose their bracha? Does it depend on the type of vegetable? And the truth of the matter is, everything that we're talking about, vegetables, could also apply to fruits. Cooking fruits, would that make the fruits lose their original bracha or not? So the Gemara started off telling us that the Mishnah says Yerakos, vegetables, are placed in the Mishnah next to the law of bread. And the understanding of that closeness in the Mishnah, the fact that it's placed next to it, implies that they would be in a similar category, at least with regard to cooking. So if the Mishnah says bread has a certain bracha, and it doesn't lower its status, so the same thing would be cooked vegetables. The Gemara's understanding is also, when it says vegetables, it could also mean cooked. And therefore, the bracha would be the same, even if they're cooked. And this is what Rav Nai said in the name of Abaye, shlokos, which means the cooked vegetables. You recite a Bari Pri Adama. You recite the same bracha. But then the Gemara mentioned that there were two big lectures that were going on, Rav Chizda and Rav Nachman. Rav Chizda gave a big lecture. He gave a Darash, Rav Chizda Darshan. He gave this lecture. And in the lecture, he mentioned in the name of our master, who he's referring to Rav, he said that the bracha on cooked vegetables is Bari Pri Adama. And then he said, but in Israel, our rabbis who have traveled here from Israel, he's referring to Ula, he said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that the brachas on cooked vegetables are Shahakal. Now, Rav Chizda, in his drasha, he says, I want to reconcile this. I want to clarify. What did I just say? I said, Rav says one thing, Bari Pri Adama, and Rabbi Yochanan, we're hearing about from Ula that Rabbi Yochanan says that it's Shahakal. So let me reconcile this. It depends. In the beginning, if the fruit is edible or the vegetable is edible, you start off as a Bari Pri Adama, thanking God for the vegetable, because it's edible raw. In such a case, most people will eat it raw because edible raw. If you cook it, you're doing something abnormal. You don't normally cook this type of a vegetable. If you're cooking it like cucumbers, maybe. Cucumbers, you don't cook cucumbers. I mean, it's so if you cook it, it would be Shahakal. Now, the same thing would apply the opposite. You have something that's not eaten raw. So if you eat it raw, you say Shahakal. And if you cook it, you would say Bari Pri Adama. Now, the Gemara tries to figure out what would be an example of these cases. So the first case, it says we understand something that begins Shahakal, and if you cook it, you make it edible. So that would be, the Gemara says, a cabbage, beets, a type of gourd, or a squash, pumpkin. These would be examples of foods that are not eaten raw. Therefore, they would start off as Shahakal, and they would end off with a Ha'adam if you cook them. Now, the Gemara asks, but how would you have a case that it's edible raw, and if you cook it, you'll have to say Shahakal? What would be a case of that? That's what the Gemara asked. Yes, Robert.
I guess the question for me is, cabbage is eaten raw because we essentially shred it for coleslaw or for,
Right.
so it's both in both ways. So one's an exception, or what do you do with that?
So you're asking from a practical perspective, what does the Gemara mean? That cabbage is eaten only cooked and it's not eaten raw. We eat it raw. So I don't know. I think we brought up this question yesterday that we sort of eat it raw. Why would it say? But it could be, first of all, maybe their cabbage was more bitter, or maybe it was just not. They didn't know, they didn't have sugar to make good coleslaw, and so they didn't have. In other words, in its form, in the processed form, they didn't have sugar, or they didn't know how. I don't know, but for whatever reason, they used to cook the cabbage, and therefore, it was considered only a food that you eat cooked. But I see a lot of people have good ideas why they did not eat cabbage raw. So let's start with I don't know who's first. Ben, you want to tell us?
No, I don't have an idea. I want to ask a question.
A different question? No. So let me see if anyone, before you ask your question, let me just see
Okay.
if anyone wants to answer Robert's question. Susan. Yes, Susan.
Okay, first of all, when you make coleslaw, you make it with vinegar and mayonnaise, and that actually cooks the cabbage.
Oh,
It
that's an
stays in
interesting
it
answer.
because
Yeah.
you put it in that, it stays for an hour or whatever, and the chemicals in vinegar and the whatever you use actually cook the ingredients.
That's an interesting point.
But
That
it's
it's
true.
considered cooked according to.
Also,
According-
lemon breaks down the fiber and any kind of acidic.
Acid, any kind of acid, right?
Thank you. Right, breaks
Okay,
down
that's
the.
interesting.
So, and that is called cooking.
Right. Okay, interesting. Simone, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think maybe the underlying difference or question is whether something is something never eaten raw. So some things you could eat raw or you could eat cooked. And then there are some things that you never eat eggplant raw, or you never eat potatoes raw, right? Where there are
But what is
many other
cabbage?
things. Well, cabbage you can eat either way. So it seems like cabbage, like many other things, we eat now raw that maybe people didn't used to do that. We eat mushrooms.
Yeah, but I'm saying,
raw.
are you answering his question? In other words, the Gemara says cabbage you don't eat raw, and seems like why not? Why wouldn't people then eat it raw? Do you have an answer?
I'm answering his question by saying that I think that that's a difference in culture and era that they didn't eat cabbage raw.
Okay,
and we
fine.
do.
Thank
That's
you.
all.
Okay. Yes. Let's see. Okay. Yehuda.
Yeah, I eat cabbage raw without
Lemon juice
right.
and vinegar. I know. I also like cabbage raw, especially purple cabbage. But
Yeah.
Okay. In any event, okay, we don't have any other answers. Okay, now we're going to go to Ben's question. Yes, Ben.
Yeah, I was going to ask what about pickled vegetables, but then they say that chometz is
Right. Well,
burning
we're
it
going to
up.
talk
I
about
don't
it
think
in a
it
little
burns
while.
it. I don't think it burns it, but it does
Right.
change it from a regular vegetable to a pickled vegetable.
Right.
Rabbi,
Okay.
Ezra had his hand up.
Oh, you're right. Ezra did, and I didn't see it now. Yes, Ezra, did you want to say something?
So based on what they're saying over here is that if it changes, if what you do to it changes the bracha. So then my question is, what happens if you have a preference in a particular way? I mean, we're all talking about eating things raw. So would, for example, eating mushrooms raw, because I personally, I don't like it when it's cooked. So eating mushrooms raw, that would be an adama. And
Well, mushrooms are considered shahakal because they grow in the air. Like they're not really considered. Mushrooms are. I mean, as far as I know, mushrooms are shahakal. So whether you eat it raw or not raw, it's always shahakal. I don't know exactly the
They
logic.
don't
behind-
always grow on the ground. They can grow on wood. They can grow on the trees.
Uh-huh.
You know that
They're not considered ha'adama. I'm not exactly. So
Yeah,
you're
they're
saying
not
because they don't
growing-
only grow on the ground? Is that what you wanted to say, Simone? Also.
That primarily, certainly any of the mushrooms that we eat grow in the ground.
Well, for some reason, the law on mushrooms is Shahakal. I'm not an agricultural expert, but something to do with the fact that they're not planted, and I don't know, they grow from. I don't know. I'm not really sure.
They
They
grow
can
from
grow in
spores.
pure fertilizer. They can grow in different places.
Uh-huh.
Right.
Right. I guess we could maybe we have someone who looks into how they grow, and
Rabbi,
someone maybe could explain.
Rabbi,
Maybe they
Yeah.
don't grow from
You
they
know the
seeds.
reason-
grow, it's a fungus. It's a fungus. It grows
fungus.
on anything. It can grow
Grows
on
on
anything.
stuff.
Wherever there's moisture, high density, humidity,
Yeah.
that's how it grows. The other thing is that I know some Lithuanian people, they go in the forest and they know how to pick them
Mm.
and which ones are toxic and which ones are
Uh-huh.
edible. You know what I'm saying? But they know, they can see that some of them, they grow on bark. It can grow on,
Yeah.
it can grow on the ground too, but it can grow just about any place, wherever there's a lot of humidity and, somebody can live off. It's a parasite, basically. That's what it is. It's considered a
Right.
parasite.
Uh-huh.
It seeks a host to grow.
So it's not surprising that the brachas Shahakal are not ha'adama.
No, that's very
Right.
understandable.
Right.
That's what it is.
Right. Very
Yeah.
understandable. Okay.
It's
Thank
a
you.
fungus, and I thought the Gemara somewhere said that it grows in the air. It grows from the air. It doesn't take from the ground.
No, it needs rot. It needs rotten
Mm.
food or rotten something.
Uh-huh.
Rotten
Okay.
wood.
Anyway, in any event, yes. Okay. So that was Ezra. Ezra, you were talking about mushrooms, right? So I guess it doesn't really. No. Oh, so but I guess your question, Ezra, was: does it depend on the person, or does it depend on the general usage? I think that's what you really wanted to ask,
Mhm.
right? Is it the person who's eating it? I like eating, cucumbers cooked. Am I going to recite a bracha on the cucumbers the way I like them, or is it so? There are things that depend on your intent and but this would not be one of those. These scenarios, giving the bracha, these situations where the bracha is based on the usual way things are eaten. So these brachas, these laws apply to the general way people eat it. Doesn't matter that you want to eat it. You like it better this way. This is not considered the appropriate way food is eaten. This food is eaten, so it's not considered that. So we don't take your liking into consideration. Okay, so the Gemara continued, and it mentioned that it depends. So the Gemara asked, so what would be an example of a vegetable that is edible raw, but then turns into a shahakal if you cook it? And the Gemara answers, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchok says, you know what? That would be garlic and leeks. It's eaten raw, and if you cook it, it will turn to shahakal. Tosfos asks, what do you mean? We cook garlic and beets and leeks with meat, and it tastes delicious. So Tosfos explains that we're talking about eating it alone. Eating it alone, garlic is more usual to eat alone raw than cooked. And leeks are more usual to eat raw when it's eaten alone than cooked. Now here again, we're going to have a little issue because, I know people who roast garlic have some tradition to have roasted garlic on Motzei Shabbos for Malava Malka. I don't know where the custom comes from, but they have garlic alone. And leeks, I mean, people make soups out of leeks. I do know people who eat leek. I don't know how enjoyable it is to eat it raw. But do anyone make salads out of leeks? Leek salad? I don't know of such a thing. But the
They do
Gemara,
make it raw too.
you've seen leeks in salad.
I saw a video about Greek people that are making a
Uh-huh.
salad with leek.
Okay. Was that like a Hanukkah video?
No, not really. It was just how to live to 100.
Oh, the Greeks know. Do they know how to live to 100?
Yeah,
Greeks, they have.
there is an island where they all.
Oh yeah, in Greece.
Yeah.
Off of Greece.
Right.
Very interesting. Okay, yes, Ezra.
It all depends on how you translate this. So we cook leeks and add a little bit of oil and lemon, and we have it as one of the simanim on Rosh Hashanah.
Oh, interesting. Okay, all right. So so that also enforces our question of what is Taisus really referring to? But whatever it is, at least in those days, my understanding with garlic is they probably liked a very sharp flavor. So if they cook garlic, you ruin the strength of the garlic. So maybe that's why they liked. In other words, for us today, us weaklings, we cook our garlic. But in maybe in the olden days, they liked a good sharp kick, and maybe that's why they ate raw garlic. So now the interesting thing,
it's also a medicine. It kills bacteria and stuff,
It's good.
It's a medicine. Right.
Maybe garlic wasn't as strong then as it is now if they're eating it
Right,
raw.
that's also true. Right, possibly it was more edible raw then. In any
My
event,
Zayda used to Pesach take cloves of garlic and just rub them raw on the matzah.
On the
They were
matzah.
gone, and that was a delicious snack.
We used to do it on toast.
My mother did it on toast too, but that's not eating the garlic raw. That's eating the toast with the flavor of the garlic.
Now, but interesting. And they didn't think of cooking the garlic and having it more smearable. That wasn't up for discussion. Okay, so the question on this Gemara is: did the Gemara have such a hard time finding a vegetable that's eaten raw? Like, why is the Gemara asking this question? How do you have a vegetable that starts off Bari Pri Hadama and ends off a Shahakal if you cook it? How do you find such a vegetable? There's no vegetables that are eaten raw. I mean, there must have been vegetables that they ate raw, especially in the olden days. Nowadays, it's very easy for us to cook. In the old days, it's much harder for them to cook. I would think that many vegetables they would eat raw. They could only, it was like hard. They needed some rabbi to come up with it. Like they understood vegetables they have to cook that they gave examples for. But where do you find what vegetable is eaten raw? You start off Bari Pri Hadama. The Gemara is asking, really? It's so hard to find such a vegetable? So to answer this question, the answer of this question, it seems, is the way Tosfos explained the law about foods that are eaten raw and cooked. What is the law with foods that are eaten both raw and cooked? Those foods are, according to Tosfos, they're going to be Bari Pri Hadama in both scenarios, whether you eat it raw or you eat it cooked. It's going to be Bari Pri Hadama. Now, the Gemara is asking, where do you have a vegetable that's eaten raw and it gets worse when it gets cooked? That's what the Gemara is asking. If something's eaten raw and cooked, that's not the Gemara's issue. The Gemara is looking specifically for a vegetable that's only eaten raw and it's not good when it's cooked, and therefore people don't eat it cooked. That was what the Gemara had an issue with. Because most vegetables can be eaten both ways, or they're eaten only cooked. But do you have a vegetable that really ruins it? Cooking ruins the vegetable? That's rare. And on that, it says, yeah, you know what? Garlic gets ruined when it's cooked, and leeks get ruined when they're cooked. They're not eaten that way. People don't eat it that way. It just wasn't, or it's either a waste of time, or it's just not it loses some of its good flavor. So that was what the Gemara is looking for. So this is sort of a proof to the way Tosfos holds that foods that are both eaten raw and eaten cooked, they are for sure ha'adama both ways. You would say recite the bracha bar pri ha'adama. So this could be a proof to Tosfos. Again, we mentioned an opinion yesterday that the Ravid holds that foods that are eaten both are going to, the fact that you cook it, make it lose its status. We mentioned the opinion that even if it's eaten both, the Gemara is saying that as long as it's eaten raw, when you eat it raw, you say bar pri ha'adama. If you cook it, you basically ruined its status. You changed
Rabbi.
it. But Tosfos disagrees with that view. And Tosfos holds that if it's eaten both, it would be, in both scenarios, it would be bar pri ha'adama. And the fact that the Gemara asked this question, it actually seems to be a proof to the way Tosfos learns this Gemara. Yes, Moshe.
Well, cucumbers, if it's berei pri adama, and when it's in the ground, then you boil it, it becomes shahakal, right? I mean, isn't that in that category also?
That I would think that would be an example. But again, there are very few examples. Most vegetables, even if you could eat it raw, you could also eat it cooked, and it might even be better cooked.
I see.
So yes, Susan.
Rabbi, they have those little tiny cucumbers that they pick.
Right.
They put them in vinegar.
Yeah. Okay.
That's a way of cooking them.
Okay. Yeah. We're talking about the opposite scenario. We're talking about
it doesn't ruin the cucumber.
Okay.
So the blessing would be what?
Well, on a pickled cucumber, you're right. You're right. It should be ha'adama.
Even though it's cooked.
Yes. Well, it's cooked in a certain way. It's pickled. But
did they do that at this time of the time? I don't know if they did pickling.
Well, they did. They did some type of pickling. They salted olives. Yeah.
Okay.
It was a preservative,
Right.
ostensibly.
Okay. So so the Gemara continues and mentioned that Rav Nachman also gave a drasha. And Rav Nachman said that we've got the opinion of our master, which is Shmuel, that cooked vegetables are bar pri ha'adama. And he mentioned that our friends who come from Israel, Ula, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, says that vegetables are shahakal, that are cooked if they're cooked. So, and Rav Nachman now wants to discuss these two views, and he says they don't agree. They're not, they're actually arguing, and this is a machlokes. And then he gives a brisa. I'm going to read over this brisa, even though we started it yesterday. The brisa says, the Tanya, we're right in the middle of the page, so maybe about 25 lines from the top, or 30 lines from the top of the page. The Tanya, we learned in a brisa, yotzin barakik hasharui, we can fulfill the mitzvah of Pesach, of matzah, with rakik, a thin wafer, sharoi, which is soaked, uvim avushal, or if it's cooked, shaloini mayach, as long as it's not dissolved. These are the words of Rameir. Rabbi Yossi says, yotzin barakik hasharui, you can fulfill the mitzvah of matzah on Pesach night with a this thin matzah wafer that's shari, that's soaked, aval loy b'mavoshel, but you cannot use a cooked matzah, cooked matzah meaning cooked in water, aval b'shalein meich, even if it's not dissolved, once it's cooked, you can't use it. And this would be the two views of Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan. Shmuel said that cooked vegetables retain their bracha, bar pri ha'adama, he would hold that matzah on Pesach that's cooked retains its bracha, and it would be fulfilling the mitzvah of lechem oini. You fulfill the mitzvah of Pesach eating matzah. And the other opinion, Rabbi Yochanan, who said that cooked vegetables lose their bracha, they're not called fruits anymore. So the same thing would be cooked matzah would not be considered matzah anymore. It wouldn't be considered. So that would be the two views. Now, the Gemara says, but your connection to the Rav Nachman's drasha, that he wanted to connect these two views of the later rabbis, that they're following in the footsteps of following the views of the earlier rabbis of the Tanoim. The Gemara says, "V'loihi," but that's not so. The Kulei Alma, because everyone agrees, everyone agrees that everyone could agree that in that Mishnah, that if it came to cooked vegetables, the bracha would be ha'adam. V'ad kan like Amar Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Yossi until now did not say his law. Only over there, hasam elamishum debein and tam matzah. Over there, he only said his law regarding matzah, that you don't fulfill the mitzvah of matzah because you have to taste matzah. And if you cook the matzah, you don't taste it. But it's not that it loses its term lechem. Aval hacha afilu Rabbi Yossi Maida here, could be even Rabbi Yossi would agree to Shmuel that it's considered to be a bracha bare pri hadama, and it would be considered a vegetable. Now, Amar Rav Chia bar Abba, Amar Rav Yochanan. Rav Chia bar Abba says in the name of Rav Yochanan, Shlokos mavarchen aleim bar pri hadama. He says that cooked vegetables bar pri hadama. Rabbi Yamin bar Yefes, Amar Rav Yochanan. So Rav Chia bar Abba said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that cooked vegetables is bar pri hadama. Now that argues with what we've heard until now. We heard it twice. That Ula said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that cooked vegetables are Shahakal. Now Rav Chia bar Abba says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, cooked vegetables are bar pri hadama. Rabbi Yamin bar Yefes, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yamin bar Yefes says the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Shlakos, cooked vegetables, mavarchen aleim Shahakal niyabed barai, you recite the Shahakal. So we've got Ula saying in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that it's Shahakal. We've got Rabbi Yamin bar Yefes saying in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that it's Shahakal. But we have Rabbi Chia bar Abba saying in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that it's bar pri hadama. So we got a little problem here. There's something like an issue of someone wasn't listening well to the class, because Rabbi Yochanan, what did Rabbi Yochanan really say? So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchok. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchok says, Kava Ula l'shabeshte Rabbi Yamin bar Yefes. Ula, that said that it's Shahakal, he established his mistaken way of learning, like Rabbi Yamin bar Yefes did, until he had it clear in his mind, and now he's repeating it. But he heard it from Rabbi Yamin bar Yefes. He's following what Rabbi Yamin bar Yefes says. He reviewed it, but maybe that's not exactly the way things should be. In other words, Rabbi Yamin bar Yefes is not as reliable as Rabbi Chia bar Abba. So Ula heard from Rabbi Yamin bar Yefes in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, and he repeated it in his name, but he's reviewing it and in believing what he heard so much, when really maybe he should have chosen the other view, the other way of what the other version of Rabbi Yochanan, and because that is maybe more reliable. And Tahi bar Reb Zera pondered about this. What is Rabbi Yamin bar Yefes? How high does he reach relative to Rabbi Chia bar Abba? Rabbi Chia bar Abba is much more reliable than. So Reb Zera was pondering about this. That how can you mention Rabbi Yamin bar Yefes next to the words of Rabbi Chia bar Abba? When you mention, in the base medrash, in the study hall, you shouldn't really mention the two in the same, as if they're equals. And he says why. He says because Reb Chia bar Abba diek begamish meitzim Reb Yochanan Rabbe. Reb Chia bar Abba was very exact in learning, and he learned the teaching from Rabbi Yochanan, his Rebbe. Rabbi Yochanan bar Yefes, like diek, Rabbi Yochanan bar Yefes was not as specific, was not as detailed. And additionally, Rabbi Chia bar Abba called plus in Yomin Mahad Talmudeh. Kamed Rabbi Yochanan Rabbe. Rabbi Chia bar Abba would go over his whatever he learned for every 30 days. He would review it in front of his Rebbe to make sure he understood him correctly. Rabbi Yamin bar Yefes le Mahadir, and Rabbi Yamin bar Yefes did not do that. So Rabbi Chia bar Abba seems to be much more reliable, which comes out that Rabbi Chia bar Abba would say that the cooked vegetables are ha'adama. That's what Rabbi Yochanan said. That's what we should really believe is the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. So we're stuck here with the question of what does Rabbi Yochanan really hold. We have different ways of understanding if Rabbi Yochanan is arguing on Rav and Shmuel, or if they're agreeing. We have Rav Chizda's view, we have Rav Nachman's view, and to be continued tomorrow. That's Hashem. Okay, everyone. Sei gesund.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye,
you, Rabbi.
everyone.
Like
Thank
this,
you,
everybody.
Rabbi.